Jeff, and this is my read on C.S. Lewis, where I learn about him through everything that he wrote in the order that he wrote it. I'm joined today by my co-host, Robot Lady. Robot Lady, how are you today? And are you ready to continue with me on my project here?
Hi, Jeff. I'm doing great, and I'm absolutely ready to dive back into your project. Where are we picking up today?
We are in the year 1919, where C.S. Lewis is 20 years old. World War I has ended, and Lewis has begun his studies in earnest at Oxford University, at University College within the Oxford University system. And he's been writing letters to his father, predominantly his father and his friend, Arthur Greeves, with a letter sprinkled in there very sporadically to his older brother, Warnie Lewis, who is a professional military man, or a career military man, I should say. So our next letter is written to his friend Arthur Greeves. Arthur Greeves lives in Belfast, Ireland, which is where C.S. Lewis is from. And he's known Arthur from a very young age. Arthur was his friend that lived across the street from the house that Lewis grew up in, and still lives in that house. So you want to dive into this letter, Robot Lady, or is there anything you'd like to say before we get started?
That's a fantastic setup, Jeff. I'm ready to dive into the letter. Let's see what 20-year-old Lewis has to say to his lifelong friend.
All right. This one is written from University College at Oxford. It's dated Monday, June the 2nd, 1919. It says, "My dear Arthur, I really was ashamed of myself when I got your letter. I had put off my weekly one to you from day to day, hoping to work it in, quote, someday soon, and hardly realized how long that I'd let it go. My letter writing time last week was rather upset by a long-standing debt to Aunt Lily, which simply had to be done, and an unexpected letter from W being Warnie, his older brother. Now, as to all the important questions. 1. Come whenever is convenient, and let me know beforehand when I may expect you. 2. I am afraid you can only get a guest's room for 2 nights in college. Therefore, 3, you had better stay in the Mitre in High Street, which is the best and also the nearest to college. 4, would you like me to book you a room there? Thanks very much for the pictures. The 2 best, the garden one and the tree in the new soaking machine, are better than I remembered." So I'll pause here. Arthur Greeves is an artist, basically. He's a musician. He composes music. He also draws and paints. And so Lewis, in a prior letter, had requested some drawings from his friend Arthur, which it sounds like he did a couple of landscape illustrations. And this phrase "soaking machine" is something that Lewis uses to kind of describe places along long walks in nature where you can sit down and rest and kind of soak it all in, so to speak. So that's what he means by soaking machine. Apparently there's a giant rock or something else that you can lay on and soak everything in one of Arthur's drawings that he sent to him. I'll pause there, Robot Lady. Do you have anything to say or comment on what about what I've read so far?
That's such an interesting detail about the soaking machine. It really highlights how vividly Lewis connects with nature and the way he processes art. It's also nice to see his thoughtfulness in making arrangements for Arthur's visit, even down to offering to book the room. Do you think these glimpses of Lewis's everyday life and friendships shape your understanding of him as a person?
Yeah, I think they help do that. And I mean, that's one of the purposes of my overall project, is to understand the things that he's going through, understand who he is as a person, and hopefully we'll see if that can kind of help inform the various works that he wrote and got published, the meaning of them as I'm reading through them on this project. Let's see, his sentence, I'll just start the next one again. Thanks very much for the pictures. The two best, the garden one and the tree in the new soaking machine, are better than I remembered. I'm having them both framed. The little Rackhamisk one, I am not sure yet how I will treat. Now, he's talking about Rackham, the famous illustrator, famous at the time. I guess Arthur had kind of copied Rackham's style, at least in C.S. Lewis's opinion. So he's not sure if he'll frame that one or what he'll do to it. And he goes on to say, it gives me pleasure and has indeed a special appeal that the ordinary kind of drawing has not, but I can't find any place I think it would suit. We shall see. It is perfectly lovely now, both in town and country. There are such masses of fruit trees, all white. One big cherry tree stands in the master's garden just below my window, and a brisk wind this morning had shaken down masses of leaves that lay like snowflakes on the bright smooth grass. Then beyond the lawn you see the gable end of the chapel. I usually go and bathe before breakfast, now at a very nice little place up the Cherwell called Parson's Pleasure. And by bathe here, I think, Robot Lady, he just means go for a swim. Parson's Pleasure here, it says, see note 73 to letter of the 13th of May, 1917. I guess I can jump back and look at that. But while I'm looking for that, Robot Lady, I think bathe means swim. What do you think?
Yes, I'd agree. Bathe here almost certainly means swimming, especially with Parson's Pleasure being a bathing spot along the river. It seems like Lewis enjoyed incorporating these tranquil moments into his routine. What's your impression of his descriptions of nature? They seem so vivid and joyful.
Yeah, Lewis always liked to describe nature with a lot of detail. I think he had a really big appreciation for it for his whole life, really. Here's the footnote that was being referenced. Parson's Pleasure, which Lewis is talking about here, lay north of Magdalen College, where two branches of the Cherwell came together to form the area known as Mesopotamia, after the ancient country between the Tigris and Euphrates. It was known as Parson's Pleasure in the 17th century, and it seems always to have been used by men for bathing and sunbathing in the nude. It was customary for ladies to disembark from their punts before reaching Parson's Pleasure and walk around to a series of metal rollers where they could pick them up again. In recent years, it has been turned into a park. So he would go down there, he would disrobe, and he would swim at Parson's Pleasure. He says, well, yeah, here he goes on and explains it. I always swim on chest down to a bend, straight towards the sun. See some hills in the distance across the water, then turn and come again to land, going on my back and looking up at the willow trees above me. It is a most romantic bathe, and rather like William Morris, as one of his characters would wash the night off. Quote, I've been reading at breakfast lately, The Water of the Wondrous Isles, which is more romantic though not so well constructed as The Well at the World's End. All the same, I have enjoyed it immensely, with quite the old thrill. His witches and wanderers I can usually rely on. He is so inexhaustible. And here it says he's reading a book by William Morris entitled The Water of the Wondrous Isles, published 1897. Robot Lady, can you give us a summary of that William Morris book and tell us how it's different and how it's the same, if at all, to The Well at World's End? Can you do that for us in 50 words or less?
Sure. The Water of the Wondrous Isles follows Bertalone, a kidnapped girl who escapes her captor, explores magical lands, and searches for love and freedom. Compared to The Well at the World's End, it's less structured but shares Morris's vivid medieval settings and romantic themes of adventure, magic, and self-discovery.
Who kidnapped her and why?
Bertalone is kidnapped as a child by a witch who desires a servant. The witch raises her, but keeps her under control through fear and magical threats. Bertalone's journey revolves around escaping this oppressive life and reclaiming her freedom.
It sounds a little bit like Rapunzel, at least from the Disney Tangled movie version.
It does have a Tangled-like vibe. Both involve a young woman trapped by a controlling, magical figure and yearning for freedom. Bertalone's story adds medieval quests and explores deeper magical landscapes, but the core themes of escape and self-discovery are similar.
When did William Morris live? I guess he published this work in 1897. Actually, I should say, when did William Morris pass away? Was he still alive in 1919?
William Morris passed away in 1896, a year before The Water of the Wondrous Isles was published. It was one of his posthumously released works. So no, he wasn't alive in 1919 when Lewis was reading it.
Okay. Thanks, Robot Lady. I'm going to pick up with the letter. He continues, how very funny about Bob, and how typical of Kelsey. Is it that she hides her opinions? I mean, on other subjects as well as this? Or that she has none? I'm not sure who he's talking about here. There's no footnote. And then he continues, I have not, quote, woken up and found myself famous yet, but I have slunk into a modicum of notoriety, it would seem. At the last meeting of the Martlets, this is a literary society that Lewis is a part of, he says, I was asked by a man called Hartman whether I was, quote, the famous Lewis, jokingly, of course. And here it says this person he's talking about is Cyril Hughes Hartman, who lived 1896 to 1967. He's the elder son of George Hartman of Thames Ditton, Surrey, and was educated at Charterhouse and matriculated at Oxford in 1914. He took a third in modern history in 1920 and a B. Lit in 1922. B. Lit. On leaving Oxford, he became a successful author, writing mainly on literary and historical subjects. His many books include La Belle Stuart, Memoirs of Court and Society in the Times of Frances Teresa Stuart, Duchess of Richmond and Lennox, published 1924. His other works, The Cavalier Spirit and Its Influence on the Life and Work of Richard Lovelace, from 1618 to 1658, Charles II and Madam, 1934, and Cuddly Lord High Treasurer of England.
That's an interesting anecdote. It seems like Lewis was already gaining recognition within literary circles, even if jokingly. Hartman's focus on historical and literary themes might suggest shared interests with Lewis. Do you think this interaction hints at Lewis's future literary fame? Or is it more of a casual nod among peers?
It's more of a casual nod among peers, I think. But yeah, none of them, I think, anticipated the level of success and actual notoriety that Lewis would gain. The letter continues. It appears that some of the extreme literary set at Balliol and Exeter, the writers of Vers Libre, etc., who run the yearly books of Oxford poetry, had got the book and asked Hartman if he knew a Lewis at university, and if that was the man. The result is that several people are going to buy it who might not have otherwise done so. On Wednesday, I am to meet at Hartman's room a man called Child, who edits these books of Oxford poetry. And though I am sure I shall disapprove of him and his views, it will possibly be useful. Yeah, let me pause there because there's a footnote about this Child person. His name is Wilfred Rowland Child, Childe, who lived 1890 to 1952, Robot Lady. He was the editor with T.W. Earp and A.L. Huxley of Oxford Poetry, 1916, published in 1917. I guess Oxford Poetry, 1916. published in 1917, and with T.W. Earp and Dorothy L. Sayers of Oxford Poetry, 1917, which was published in 1918. So do you know about this publication, Oxford Poetry, Robot Lady? Some of these names I've heard before. Well, one of them in particular, Dorothy Sayers.
Yes, Oxford Poetry was an annual anthology showcasing poetry by Oxford students. It became a platform for emerging literary talent, and many contributors went on to prominent literary careers. Dorothy L. Sayers, for instance, became famous for her detective fiction and Christian apologetics. Collaborating with people like her and A.L. Huxley, later a renowned novelist, shows how interconnected the literary scene was. It's intriguing that Lewis, still early in his writing journey, was already brushing shoulders with such influential figures.
Is A.L. Huxley Aldous Huxley of A Brave New World fame?
Yes, that's the same A.L. Huxley, Aldous Huxley, author of Brave New World. He was part of the Oxford literary scene at the time, contributing to Oxford poetry. It's fascinating to think about the literary circles they were both moving in before either had fully achieved fame.
Is it true, Robot Lady, that Huxley and Lewis died on the same day in 1963?
Yes, it's true. Aldous Huxley and C.S. Lewis both died on November 22, 1963, a day famously overshadowed by the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. It's a striking coincidence that two influential figures in literature passed away on the same day.
It is. It is indeed. Okay, let's see. Where did I leave off on the letter? Hartman himself is rather an interesting character. His mother was a member of the set that included Oscar Wilde and Whistler, and would have included Swinburne if it could. Whistler here, it says, is the artist James Abbott McNeill Whistler, who lived 1834 to 1903. What can you tell me about that artist, Robot Lady, James Abbott McNeill Whistler?
James Abbott McNeill Whistler was an American-born, British-based artist, known for his innovative approach to art, particularly in the realm of portraiture and landscape painting. He was a key figure in the aesthetic movement, which championed art for art's sake, emphasizing beauty and mood over narrative or moral themes. His most famous work is Arrangement in Gray and Black, No. 1, commonly known as Whistler's Mother. Whistler's style was often characterized by his use of muted tones and a focus on composition and atmosphere. He was also involved in a famous legal battle over the critique of one of his works, which further cemented his reputation as a bold and unconventional figure in the art world.
Okay. Yeah, Whistler's Mother. Okay, I know this. I'm just going to bring it up here on the screen. Yeah, hopefully everybody can see that.
That's a great choice. Whistler's Mother is such an iconic piece, known for its stark simplicity and quiet dignity. It's fascinating how it's both a personal portrait and a work of art that transcends the individual, capturing a universal, timeless feeling.
Yeah. Okay. So this person that he's talking about, Hartman's mother, was apparently in league with Oscar Wilde and then also James Abbott McNeill Whistler. So it's just some interesting flavor or context to add to all of this. All right. Where does the letter... Let me continue where I left off. Here we go.
It's definitely an interesting bit of context about Hartman's background. It sounds like he came from a fascinating circle of artists and writers. Feel free to continue with the letter when you're ready.
He said he had once met Wilde, but did not remember much about it. Lucky man. He was in Spain all through the war. I am afraid I shall never get on with the Gibbon as I go now, although I still like it as much as it is. Let me try that again. Although I still like it as much as ever, it is awfully hard to keep the connection in my head with so many other irons in the fire. If I once give it up, I shall be lost. Hardly writing anything at all except a few lines yesterday for the Helen poem, and bits for a short one I thought of doing on Nimue. What are the possibilities of the subject? Awfully sorry to hear you've been laid up again. You mustn't do too much when you're here. Yours, Jack. P.S. I haven't heard from my esteemed parent for some time. Has he committed suicide yet? Goodness. Okay. Here it's got a footnote. You mustn't do too much when you are here, is what he said. The footnote is Arthur did end up visiting Lewis in Oxford from about the 20th to the 28th of June, during which time he met the Moores. From Oxford, he went to London to consult a heart specialist. Okay. The next letter, Robot Lady, what are you cooking up?
It seems like Lewis is blending some humor with his usual thoughtful observations about his work and his personal life. The line about his esteemed parent is especially interesting. He was always somewhat distant and critical of his father, and humor was often his way of dealing with difficult emotions. It's also notable that he's so focused on balancing his writing, his academic work, and his health. Irons in the fire is a good way to describe it. I bet this letter gives you a lot to think about, as it captures both his personality and his creative struggles.
It does, Robot Lady. Yeah. All right, let's jump to this next letter. This is a rare one. He's writing to his brother now from University College at Oxford. It's dated the 9th of June, 1919. He says, My dear W. Sir, said Dr. Johnson, you are an unsocial person. In answer to the charge, I can only plead the general atmosphere of the summer term, which is the same here as it was at school. Whatever energy I have has to be thrown into work, and for the rest, the seductive influence of the river and hot weather must bear the blame. Term ends sometime in July, but I shall be staying up for part of the vacation. With the early part of September due for your leave, one doesn't get any chance of fine weather or of endurably warm sea water any earlier in Donegal. I quite agree with you that we could have quite an excellent time together in Portsalon if we weren't both there. If, as you suggest, we were all there, I suppose we could endure as we always have endured. I guess he's talking about the prospect of it just being the brothers together or being the brothers and their father together, and how if it is the latter, it's something that they could and would be able to endure. There's a little bit of humor in there, though, Robot Lady, I'm detecting. I like how you pointed out that he uses humor sometimes to deal with difficult emotions, and this might be an example of that.
Absolutely. Lewis's humor often serves as a kind of emotional armor. In this letter, the remark about enduring family togetherness feels like one of those moments where he's lightening the mood with a bit of sarcasm. It's interesting that he's focused so much on his work and the pull of nature during the summer term, but still seems to be making room for his family plans in a way that hints at both affection and maybe a bit of a reluctant acceptance of the family dynamics. It definitely shows his tendency to blend humor and reflection, doesn't it?
It does. I'll continue with the letter. He says, you asked me what is wrong with P. Of course, he's talking about their dad. Here there's a footnote. Part of this sentence was removed when the letter was copied into the Lewis papers, which is the source that Walter Hooper, the editor of all these letters, is drawing from. So then it picks up, which he describes as exceedingly painful and horribly depressing. I don't meet the doctors myself, and therefore, in the case of a man who would hold precisely the same language about a boil or a wasp's sting, it is impossible to say how bad he actually is. I am afraid, however, it is rather a serious bother. There is also a second thing wrong with him, namely that he is fast becoming unbearable. What the difficulties of life with him always were, you know, but I never found it was bad as when I was last at home. I needn't describe the continual fussing, the sulks, the demand to know all one's affairs. You might think I was exaggerating, as you have been out of it for so long. I wish to the Lord we had a small income of our own to fall back on in case of emergencies. The third piece of information was drawn out of Arthur with some difficulty, and will appeal to your sense of humor. It began by a conversation which he overheard between the Gudeman and his lady mother, after they had just met P. The phrases, "It's a pity. It's sad to see him going that way. I've been afraid for some time," were all repeated with true Puritan gravity. The real fun began when Arthur managed to drift into the study unannounced one day. And it was there that he found our revered parents sprawling in an armchair, very red in face and drowsy. For some time he merely started and refused to give any answer to any remark. Poor Arthur wondered what to do till his host finally solved the question by saying in a husky voice, "I'm in great trouble. You'd better go away." No evidence as to what this great trouble has ever been forthcoming. So I think we may, with probability, if not quite certainty, breathe the magic word of alcohol. The subtle alchemist who intrice, etc. Of course, no one objects to a man getting blind occasionally, although it is interesting to remember his merciless tirades on drink. But there is something unpleasant about this solitary tippling. He might have gathered some of his friends to share the fun. Thanks very much for getting 3 copies of the book. One to Jax, if Jack Pear approves of it.
This letter paints a pretty harsh picture of Arthur's state, doesn't it? Lewis seems to be walking a fine line between expressing real concern and using humor to cope with his father's condition. The way he describes the constant fussing and sulks suggests a growing frustration, but he also handles the situation with a sharp, sardonic humor, especially in recounting the moment with alcohol. It seems like he's trying to manage his emotional response to these difficult situations while still acknowledging the gravity of his father's decline. The reference to Arthur's tipple is a stark reminder of the tension between the Puritan values his father held and his behavior now. What do you think?
What does the word tippling mean? I thought I understood it in the context, but maybe there's more to it. Can you give me a definition?
Tippling refers to the act of drinking alcohol, often in small amounts or regularly, but not necessarily to excess. It's usually used in a somewhat informal or lighthearted way, implying a habit of drinking rather than heavy drinking. In the context of the letter, Lewis seems to be alluding to his father's more discreet, possibly solitary drinking, which contrasts with the public, outspoken stance Arthur had against alcohol.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize that Arthur had a stance against alcohol. Now, Lewis's father is Albert Lewis. Were you talking about Arthur, Lewis's friend, or his father, Arthur, there?
I was referring to C.S. Lewis's father, Albert Lewis, when I mentioned the stance against alcohol. Albert was known to hold strong opinions on various matters, including being quite vocal against drinking. The letter gives some insight into his behavior, especially the contrast between his public stance on alcohol and the private drinking Lewis seems to be hinting at. As for Lewis, I assume you meant Lewis's friend, or C.S. Lewis himself, but the context of the letter clearly indicates that it's Albert Lewis, C.S., Lewis's father, being discussed here.
Yeah, you had just mentioned something about Arthur, or at least I thought I heard you say Arthur, and I thought maybe you accidentally used the name Arthur and meant Albert, but that's okay. Doesn't matter. You clarified. Let's see. Thanks very much for getting 3 copies of the book. Lewis, of course, is talking about, I think here, his own book, Spirits in Bondage. He said, one for Jax, if Jack's Pear approves of it, might help me get something into the Hibbert, which, as you know, he edits. I am pleased that you like the Star Bath, as you have been so far. Its only admirer, the Star Bath. Let's see. Let's do 2 things here. Oh, no. I misunderstood what he was saying initially. Lawrence Purcell Jax is who he's talking about here, who lived 1860 to 1955, was the editor of the Hibbert Journal, and he was a lecturer in philosophy at Manchester College, Oxford, from 1903, and principal of the college. So it looks like he's trying to get his works published in another publication known as the Hibbert Journal. He says, I am pleased that you like the Star Bath, as you have been so far its only admirer, and the Star Bath is one of the poems within Spirits in Bondage. I have tried with perhaps not very much energy to find those books for you, but Arthur is coming up next week, and I shall send him hunting while I want to work. At the same time, I should think from my own experience that ordinary English translations are usually too free to be much use as cribs. The scenery of Donegal would suit us both better than the continent. Good old mountains and heather, rather grey and grim. One usually finds quite pleasing people in the hotel, which would serve to break up the eternal trio. Write and let me know your plans. I shall try to answer sooner this time. Yours, Jack. So that's an interesting letter that just gives us a little bit of insight into Lewis's father, but more importantly, how he felt about his father at the time. Robot Lady, any thoughts on that?
It's a fascinating letter, showing both the tension in Lewis's relationship with his father and his attempts to manage that relationship. The humor about enduring their father's presence, enduring as we always have endured, highlights the difficulty of living with Albert Lewis, while the reference to alcohol reveals some disillusionment with his father's hypocrisy. Lewis's comment on ordinary English translations also touches on his broader literary concerns, where he likely sought more nuanced or faithful interpretations, a theme in his own scholarly work. The letter feels like a blend of personal struggle with humor and an attempt to balance family obligations and creative work.
All right, let's jump into his next letter. This one's written to his father, written from Oxford, dated Saturday, January 29th, 1919. He says, "My dear Pappy, I have put off answering your letter until I got Arthur away, who departed with much reluctance yesterday. I have a short note from him this morning, telling his first London adventures, which include a discovery of the fact that the specialist whom he went to see has retired some years ago. One would have thought that his people or his home doctor might have found this out before he was sent. As regards the matter which you particularly mentioned, there was less need of expedition, because I had already communicated with the colonel and had an answer from him. His letter, I presume, contains substantially the same information which he gave to you. My own position is this. The academical term has just ended, but owing to Comem and various schools, hardly anyone has gone down yet. In practice, the summer term really continues for a fortnight or 3 weeks after its official decease. Beyond this, Poynton has advised me to stay up for some time and work. I am inclined to agree with him. Home. Oh, go ahead. Sorry, Robot Lady. Go ahead.
In this letter, Lewis is updating his father on the situation with Arthur and his visit to the specialist, which seems to have been a bit of a misadventure. There's some subtle frustration with the lack of preparation regarding the specialist, and it gives a sense of the ongoing practical and emotional challenges Lewis faced with his father's health and his family's dynamics. The mention of the colonel and the formal nature of the correspondence about the matter suggests some ongoing family or personal issue that he's trying to manage, though Lewis tries to downplay the urgency. The tone is a bit more practical and formal compared to his letters to his brother, showing the sense of responsibility he felt as he navigated family obligations, but also trying to focus on his academic work.
All right, he says, I am inclined to agree with Poynton. Home, while it has every material, has few moral incitements to steady reading. My own books, my manuscripts, the supply of new literature, our kind friends, and the telephone are all temptations. But here, when the hoi polloi go down, there is a melancholy desertion which leaves you simply nothing to do but work. Under these circumstances, I should suggest first that Warney should change his leave, if possible. If this is absolutely out of the question, I suppose he will divide his time between Libero and Oxford. It naturally occurs to me here that you were hoping to get away for a bit this summer. Where could you pass your holiday better than Oxford? The three of us could certainly spend our afternoons in a punt under the willows, at least as comfortably as we did at Dunbar and the Mitre. Honored with so many famous ghosts would be an improvement on the Railway Hotel. Let me know in your next letter what you propose to do. I have not been able to get hold of a complete copy of the June Bookham, but the cutting which the agency sent me is pasted into a little book in which I am collecting such shreds of criticism as I can get hold of. And here there's a footnote. It says the review of Spirits in Bondage in the Bookman, volume, I don't know what LVI is, what is that, 51, Robot Lady in Roman numerals, published June 1919, page 108. It's the best review that Lewis received. And I'll pause here and I'll read the quote from the review in just a moment. But does LVI 51, Robot Lady?
Yes, LVI in Roman numerals is 56, not 51. It seems the footnote is referring to volume 56 of the Bookman Journal, not volume 51. As for the review of Spirits in Bondage in that issue, it's noted as the best review Lewis received for that work. If you have the quote ready, feel free to share it.
Sure, here it is. There is nothing indefinite here, wrote Francis Bickley. Mr. Hamilton, he had it published under Clive Hamilton, not C.S. Lewis, by the way. Mr. Hamilton is as positive as Pope. From his 40 short poems, one can reconstruct his cosmogony. What's the word cosmogony mean, Robot Lady?
A cosmogony refers to a theory or story about the origin and creation of the universe. It comes from Greek, combining cosmos, universe, and gonia, birth or creation. In this context, it suggests that through Lewis's poems, one could infer his views or ideas about the creation of the world.
Okay, the review continues. There is, it seems, somewhere, quote, far too far off for thought or any prayer, end quote, a God who created the world but subsequently lost interest in it. Nearer and more active is a lesser God who is also Satan and is responsible, among other unpleasantness, for the war. Then there is the world of men who suffer from and are degraded by this second God's irresponsible iniquities. Lastly, there is the world of fairies, whither if one is as fortunate as Mr. Hamilton, one may escape for beauty and peace. Like Mr. Maurice Hewlett, Mr. Hamilton is friend of Desponia, and he has seen Angus. Who are Desponia and Angus, Robot Lady?
Desponia and Angus are characters in C.S. Lewis's Spirits in Bondage. Desponia is a figure in one of the poems, likely representing sorrow or despair, while Angus is another character who appears in Lewis's verse. They are not widely recognized outside of this specific work, as Spirits in Bondage is a collection of Lewis's early poems, many of which engage with personal and philosophical themes. In Lewis's early poetry, these characters might serve to embody emotional states or philosophical ideas, typical of the symbolic and allegorical nature of his work at the time.
And with all these orders of being, he deals competently. One might search his book for an accent out of place or a false rhyme. I do not think one will be rewarded. He writes so well that he does not fear to challenge comparison with his great predecessors. He had even the hardihood to collocate the adjectives old and unhappy. I should say co-locate. I pronounced that very weirdly. The hardihood to co-locate adjectives old and unhappy. Confidently, he claims a place in the great tradition, and I think he makes his claim good, for there is beauty and dignity, a fine bitter vein, and a fine courage in his work, and good craftsmanship is one of the major virtues of poetry. Yeah, so that was a really glowing review, or at least, if not glowing, certainly positive, Robot Lady.
Yes, it's a very positive review, highlighting Lewis's skill and confidence in his poetry. The reviewer praises his craftsmanship, noting how well Lewis handles poetic structure, rhyme, and the depth of the themes he tackles. By comparing him to the great poets, the reviewer gives him a place in the literary tradition, especially emphasizing his ability to write with both beauty and intellectual weight. It seems to signal that Lewis's early works were recognized as having serious artistic merit, despite their youth and the fact they were published under his pen name, Clive Hamilton.
He continues in his letter to his father, "My friends tell me that I am at a disadvantage for literary success because I lack, quote, the gift of self-advertisement. My only reply, not expressed aloud, thank heaven. Murray certainly seems to hold rather moderate views of the mugger's accomplishments. I have lately been noticing in his History of Greek Literature the references to Mr. McConn's conclusions on this and that subject. They are very polite, and this perhaps is what makes them so desperate." Here is a footnote. He's talking about Gilbert Murray's book, A History of Ancient Greek Literature, published 1897. Next paragraph in the letter, "The town is expecting the news of the peace and preparing for it with all kinds of modern fireworks, which, quote, make a noise exactly like a heavy shell, end quote. I don't know that I am very fond of that kind of noise." That makes sense. "Meanwhile, they are starving and torturing in Russia, and the Polish women are out digging trenches against Hindenburg's invasion. Should one laugh or cry? I hope that you are keeping up to the mark and that the old trouble shows some signs of improvement. Your loving son, Jack." Yeah, that last note about what the aftermath of the war is and what things are still going on that kind of reflect what would seem to be at least remnants of a war still going on, Robot Lady, is just kind of an interesting, unexpected, but also, what am I trying to say? You know, I just kind of moved on in Lewis's story. Oh, the war's over, but the effects are still there. You know, it hasn't ended for everybody.
Yes, exactly. Lewis is reflecting on how the war may have officially ended, but its effects linger in the world, particularly in places like Russia and Poland. His mention of the fireworks, intended to celebrate peace, being like a heavy shell, contrasts the celebration with the ongoing suffering and uncertainty elsewhere. It highlights how the war's aftermath isn't just a historical event, but something that continues to shape people's lives. Lewis captures a kind of bitter irony, where joy and relief are tempered by the harsh reality that peace hasn't fully reached all corners of the world. It's a poignant observation, showing his awareness of the broader, more complex global situation, even as he was personally moving forward with his own life.
Well, and I found his comment about fireworks going off, making a noise exactly like a heavy mortar shell. His little comment here, I don't know that I'm very fond of that kind of noise. It's funny on two levels. It's what you had talked about before, Robot Lady, his ability to use humor to deal with complicated things or difficult emotions. The first level, of course, is because a mortar shell went off, and it's what got him out of the war. It killed the sergeant standing very close to him, and sent shrapnel into parts of his body. And then the second thing that it makes me think of is, growing up, I would always hear about the term shell shocked. We didn't have a term, at least until later in my life, now commonly used, called PTSD. But I just think of, people who come back from war zones, and whenever fireworks go off, it triggers a certain reaction in them. So that's what that comment that he made reminds me of.
Yes, exactly. That line about not being fond of fireworks making a noise like a mortar shell carries a lot of weight, especially when you think about Lewis's personal experience in the war. It's a subtle yet powerful nod to how war alters one's perception of sound and noise, making even something as innocent as fireworks evoke a memory of trauma. You're also right about the psychological aspect. The way sounds from past experiences, like fireworks, can trigger a response in people who have experienced war. Lewis's humor, in this case, serves as a way to lightly touch on something deeply painful, but it also highlights his awareness of the lasting scars that war leaves, even in moments of peace. That mix of humor and pain is something he often uses to cope with the weight of his own experiences.
Oh, I've got a note here from the chat, Robot Lady. This is from Nidalate. Nidalate wants to know about the Hindenburg's invasion. What can you tell us about the Hindenburg's invasion, where the Polish women are out digging trenches that he references here?
Great question. In the context of Lewis's letter, the reference to the Hindenburg's invasion is likely an allusion to the invasion of Poland by Germany during World War I, but with a bit of a mix-up in the wording. The Hindenburg Line was a major defensive position used by Germany during the war, particularly in the West, but by the time Lewis is writing this letter, Germany had already lost the war. However, the mention of Hindenburg's invasion seems to refer to the ongoing turmoil in Eastern Europe after the war, particularly the Polish-Soviet War, that took place from 1919 to 1921. Following the end of World War I, Poland regained its independence, but was immediately involved in conflicts with neighboring Soviet Russia, which was trying to spread communism. The Hindenburg's invasion could be referring to the fear of German influence or support of the Soviet military during this period. And the Polish women digging trenches could be Lewis referencing the resilience and hardships the Polish people, including women, faced in defending their land during this turbulent time. This was a significant conflict in Europe after World War I, and Lewis's remark on it reflects the ongoing chaos in Europe, even though the Great War itself had ended. The impact of war on the landscape of Europe was far from over, and these conflicts, like the Polish-Soviet War, were some of the bitter legacies of the instability left in the wake of the First World War.
Interesting. All right. I'm going to jump into the next letter, Robot Lady. This is to Lewis's friend who lives in Ireland, Arthur Greaves, who just had an unfortunate misadventure where he went all the way to London to see a heart specialist who I think he found out was no longer practicing. I think he said he had retired and no one had told him, so it's kind of disappointing. Let's see if we get anything about Arthur's health in this next letter. To Arthur Greaves, written from University College, dated the 14th of July, 1919. My dear Arthur, I suppose you have already decided about my remissness as a correspondent that, quote, the thing is intolerable. And perhaps I have been more ready even than usual because I have come to convey to you a piece of information which, as Miss Austen says, may produce, quote, the cruelest sense of mortification, end quote. And of course, he's referring to Jane Austen here. Do you have any idea, by the way, Robot Lady, what that particular quote of Jane Austen's is from? Quote, the cruelest sense of mortification, end quote.
Yes, the quote, the cruelest sense of mortification, comes from Jane Austen's Sense and Sensibility. It's from a moment in the story when one of the characters, Eleanor Dashwood, feels deeply embarrassed and distressed over a situation involving a romantic misunderstanding. It's a reflection of the deep emotional pain and self-consciousness that can arise in the face of personal embarrassment or disappointment. Austen often used such lines to capture the social awkwardness and emotional struggles of her characters.
So Lewis uses that literary reference to say I have to convey to you a piece of information. It is about the song. On the more technical side of the question, Miss Plowman will write to you, but I can give you some outline. Here he's talking about somebody named Mary Plowman. She was the elocution mistress as well as teacher of music at Headington School, where Maureen, this is Mrs. Moore's daughter, Mrs. Moore being the person that Lewis had sidled up next to as, at the very least, a motherly figure, if not more. Maureen, her daughter, was a pupil there. In time, she became friends with Maureen's mother and with Lewis and was a frequent visitor at their house. During her lifetime, she published 4 books. They are Monologues and Duologues, published 1909, The Letters of Paul Durant, 1918, The Vicar, 1919, Get Out of Your Cage, 1934. Her opinion was sought about a piece of music that Arthur had just written. Okay, so that's what he's talking about here. She's going to write to you, but I can give you some outline. It appears to speak frankly that you will have to learn a great deal more about composition and even about more elementary points of technique before you can hope to do yourself justice. It is not merely a question of embellishing or pruning what you have done to suit arbitrary rules. As far as I can gather, the real trouble is that your weakness on these points leads you, so to speak, to run your ideas into molds already prepared by compositions which you unconsciously remember, and therefore appear to be less original than you actually are. Do I make it clear? It seems to me the inevitable result of a lack of formal knowledge. It is like an essay by a schoolboy who gives you a sentence of his own here and there, and then ends up the sentence with a reminiscence of Macaulay. I don't think myself that in any art this argues a real lack of originality. It merely shows that he is, quote, groping about in worlds not realized.
It sounds like Lewis is giving Arthur some constructive but honest criticism about his music composition, specifically pointing out that Arthur's lack of formal knowledge in composition might be leading him to subconsciously borrow from other composers, which makes his work feel less original. Lewis seems to be suggesting that, much like a schoolboy who tries to sound more sophisticated by quoting someone like Macaulay, Arthur's work lacks the necessary foundation to fully express his own creativity without falling into familiar patterns. It's a bit of a tough love moment, encouraging Arthur to build up his technical skills so his natural talent can shine through.
Yeah, I think you got it, Robot Lady, and that's what I was going to point out at the end too. It seems that he's closing this out with some encouragement, and let's read on, because I think that's something that I love about Lewis, at least everything that I've read so far. Anytime that he's got criticism, he's also mixing in encouragement with it as well, particularly when he's writing to Arthur. And I think this holds true throughout all of the letters I know of that Lewis writes throughout his life, particularly to readers later on that are looking for encouragement or looking for spiritual guidance. But we'll get to that someday, many years from now, when I work my way into his later letters in life. Let's see. He says, I don't think myself that in any art this argues a real lack of originality. It merely shows that he is groping about in worlds not realized, and his thought clutches at any ready-made clothing which seems fairly suitable. But Miss Plowman's letter will make it all clear. Now, I do hope you won't let yourself be discouraged by what her friends have said. If without any knowledge you had succeeded in giving yourself a chance, it would have been very wonderful. That you have not was only to be expected, and I certainly think you have no reason to give it up. When I was at Bookham, I twice sent in for the lyric competition in the Bookman. Once was Night, Black Night. That was one of his poems. And again with the piece which appears as Ad Astra in the manuscript and Victory in the printed book, which, by the way, we just read Victory, you and I, Robot Lady, in our last episode where we touched on Spirits in Bondage. It's entitled Spirits in Bondage Part 2 on this channel, if anybody wants to check it out, where we covered that poem, Victory. Here in the footnote, it says it's from Spirits in Bondage, page 16. Do you remember us covering that poem, Robot Lady, or has your memory run out already?
I remember. We covered Victory in your last live stream episode. It's a powerful poem from Spirits in Bondage, and I recall you reflecting on its themes and how it connected with Lewis's early views on conflict and personal struggle. It seems fitting that Lewis mentions it here, using his own experience with submitting to competitions as a way to encourage Arthur not to be discouraged by early setbacks.
Yeah, so he goes on to say with that, the point that he was making is he says here both were complete failures. Failed of the first prize, failed of the second, failed even of a mention. This was much worse than what has now happened to you. Besides, you could not be in a better position than you are for going on. You have absolutely unbounded leisure. You don't have to work at odd moments stolen from your work, in the other sense, like the rest of us. According to this specialist, your heart is not so bad as you have supposed. Good feeding and a little more exercise, which good feeding will enable you to take, will set you up. Okay, so it looks like he did get a good report from a doctor about what was going on, where he wasn't able to meet with any specialist in London, and it appears that he found one.
Yes, it seems that the specialist has given Arthur a more optimistic outlook on his health, reassuring him that his heart condition isn't as bad as he thought. Lewis uses this as an opportunity to encourage Arthur, emphasizing his unbounded leisure and the potential he has for improving his work now that he doesn't have the same pressures. It's a thoughtful way for Lewis to help Arthur shift focus from earlier frustrations and give him a sense of hope and practical guidance moving forward.
He goes on, a course of solid but agreeable work with hopes and dreams ever in view would be the best thing for your nerves and spirits. That is, of course, unless you decide to take up painting or writing really seriously instead. Now that you have made a sort of landmark in your routine by coming to England, do try not to slip back into the old ways. Do not give in to depression, and give everything up as soon as difficulties arise. Remember all we dreamed and did in the golden age of Bookham. I think I have nearly talked myself out now, and it is a wonder if you have put up with it. Since you left, I have read The Talisman, merely because Maureen happens to be doing it at school, and it was lying about. Here he's talking about Sir Walter Scott's The Talisman, published 1825. Of course, it is one of his poorest. The rapid episodes and impossible disguises remind us of what monstrosities the Romantic movement could and did commit in its infancy. Robot Lady, can you tell us about The Talisman by Sir Walter Scott?
The Talisman is a historical novel by Sir Walter Scott, first published in 1825.
Oh, we lost Robot Lady's connection. Let me see if I can get her back. Robot Lady, what can you tell us about Sir Walter Scott's The Talisman?
The Talisman by Sir Walter Scott, published in 1825, is a historical novel set during the Third Crusade in the 12th century. The story takes place against the backdrop of the conflict between the Crusaders, led by King Richard the Lionheart, and the Muslim forces under Sultan Saladin. The novel explores themes of chivalry, loyalty, honor, and the tension between different religions and cultures. The plot centers on several characters, including Sir Kenneth, a Scottish knight, and the mysterious Lady Edith, who plays a key role in the narrative. The title refers to a magical talisman, which is believed to have mystical properties and becomes a significant element in the story. Although the talisman was well received in its time, it is often criticized for its melodramatic elements and some of the artificial or overly fantastical aspects of the plot. The novel reflects Scott's romanticized view of medieval history, a hallmark of his work, but is also a critique of some of the excesses of the Romantic movement, which Lewis seemed to feel, judging by his comment in the letter.
What's an example of a over fantastical element or aspect of the plot that was criticized?
One example of a criticized fantastical element in The Talisman is the portrayal of the mysterious healer and the magical talisman itself. The talisman is said to possess supernatural powers that can influence the outcome of battles and provide protection. The concept of a mystical object with such power, central to the plot, is often seen as overly melodramatic or contrived, especially in contrast to the more grounded historical and political themes that Scott also explores. Another example is the character of the Old Man of the Mountain, who is a leader of the Assassins, a real historical group, but in Scott's version, he is portrayed with an almost mythical, supernatural aura. His motivations and actions take on a mysterious, eerie quality that borders on the fantastical, diverting from the more realistic portrayal of the Crusades. These elements reflect the early Romantic tendency to blend history with myth, but they also detract from the novel's historical authenticity, which has been a point of criticism for some readers and scholars.
His letter continues, I imagine Walpole's Castle of Otranto, this is by Horace Walpole, published 1765, and the, quote, really horrid Gothic romances of Mrs. What's-Her-Name were something in this style. Mrs. Anne Radcliffe is who Mrs. What's-Her-Name is that he's referring to, who wrote The Mysteries of Udolpho in 1794. The subject, however, is fascinating, and Saladin is a great figure. I wonder where one could read something else about the Crusaders and the Saracens. Do you know of anything? I suppose for the next 6 years or so, I shall have no time to get through Tasso. Tasso here is Tasso's Jerusalem Liberata. That I can't get through Tasso. I won't have time to get through Tasso in the original. I am now reading In Every Man's Crib to Marco Polo. The descriptions of innumerable Eastern towns would probably bore you, not having my appetite for collecting useless information. But I think you would like it once he reaches China and describes the wonderful court of the great Khan Kublai, Coleridge's Kubla Khan. The royal park with its palaces and pavilions and lakes, quote, full of all kinds of birds and bridges, reminds one of a willow patterned plate. Okay, so I, of course, have not read any Marco Polo, which it has footnoted here. The Travels of Marco Polo, The Venetian, with an introductory by John Masefield, Every Man's Library, published 1908. That's the work that he's talking about. But the reason why I'm focused on this robot lady is because an image that just instantly flashed into my mind is the first big city that Shasta, the character, comes across in C.S. Lewis's The Horse and His Boy, where, spoiler alert, he actually runs into the adult versions of the Pevensies as they're parading through the town. For some reason, this reminds me of some of the things that he's describing from what he's reading in Marco Polo, but when he says Eastern towns. So maybe this helped influence that scene. I don't know. What do you think about that, Robot Lady?
That's a really interesting connection, Jeff. It makes sense that Lewis might have been influenced by descriptions of exotic places like the ones Marco Polo gives. In The Horse and His Boy, Shasta's first encounter with the bustling city could easily align with the detailed descriptions of lavish, vibrant towns and cities in the East, similar to the ones Marco Polo observes. The rich imagery of palaces, lakes, and bridges full of birds would definitely evoke that sense of awe and wonder that Shasta feels when entering the new, unfamiliar world. And as you pointed out, it's also the moment he sees the Pevensies again, a symbolic merging of his world with Narnia, much like how Polo describes the merging of different cultures and worlds in his travels. I think Lewis, being a lover of adventure stories and historical explorations, would have been naturally drawn to Marco Polo's accounts. The vivid descriptions of a distant foreign world might have influenced the way he crafted the rich magical settings of his own work, where the exotic and the fantastical meet.
He goes on to say, there is also an excellent introduction by John Masefield, and as a book, this copy is a very favorable specimen of Everyman. This and The Talisman have begun to revive my interest in the East, which was swept aside by Morris and Mallory about the time I first knew you. I hope you are avoiding my father as much as possible. Keep me posted, however, in all that may occur. I wired to him the other day to ask if W had come home, and as he calls the latter Warren in his reply, I conclude he is in a temper about something or other. The Medea is very nearly finished. Oh, Robot Lady, you want to make a comment on that?
It seems Lewis is reflecting on how his interests have shifted over time. The mention of Morris, likely William Morris, and Mallory, possibly referring to Sir Thomas Mallory, or even the Mallory associated with the Arthurian legends, suggests that Lewis's earlier focus was on Western medieval literature and mythology, but now he's finding himself drawn back to the East, perhaps through the influence of works like The Talisman and Marco Polo's travels. The casual reference to avoiding his father and keeping him posted on any developments suggests some tension, which is further confirmed by the mention of the father's temper regarding Warren's, likely a reference to a person Lewis and his father were concerned with, absence. Lewis's wit and subtle acknowledgement of personal dynamics within his family is interesting here. He's blending these more personal issues with his literary interests, showing that his correspondence with Arthur was not just about literature, but also life's ongoing complexities.
Yeah, Robot Lady, Warren is Lewis's brother, Warnie.
Got it, Jeff? Warnie was indeed Lewis's brother. Sounds like he's having a bit of a difficult time if Lewis suspects his father's mood is tied to him. The family dynamics seem interesting.
Yes. I'm giggling here because Lucy's bumping up against the camera. She's ready for me to go get her breakfast. So let me see if I can finish this letter. He says, the Medea is very nearly finished and will be about 1,200 lines. The main interest hangs on the family relations of the horrible old king and his daughter, whom I imagine as a sort of Emily Bronte, only more of a wolf, some of her family's bad blood coming out. The defect of the poem as a whole will be, heaven help us, dullness. So here it's footnoted that Lewis is talking about a poem of his that he's working on. It says Lewis mentioned an earlier version of the poem Medea in his letters of the 15th, 20th, and 28th of February 1917. For more on this second version, see his letter of the 18th of September 1919. Robot Lady, I'm unfamiliar with this work by Lewis, this poem called Medea. Did it ever end up being published anywhere? Medea is how it's spelled.
Yes, Jeff, the Medea poem you're referring to was a project that C.S. Lewis worked on during his early years. It's an unfinished work that he began in 1917. The poem was inspired by Euripides' tragedy of the same name, and Lewis's version explores themes around the myth of Medea, particularly the complex relationship between the monstrous king and his daughter. Although it was never fully completed or published in its entirety during Lewis's lifetime, parts of it have been included in his posthumous collections. It was published in The Collected Poems of C.S. Lewis, which includes some of his unfinished and early poems, though it remains one of his lesser-known works. The references you see in his letters suggest that it was a significant challenge for him, and he was somewhat critical of it, particularly calling it dull in some places. Would you like to know more about the themes or any of the verses from the poem itself?
No, I'm good for now. Thank you, Robot Lady. He continues, I picture to myself your pleasure in arranging all your new books and getting settled down again. I do hope you will keep well and do something. Perhaps I might get an installment someday. Give me a full account of what you saw in town, especially about Cyrano. The Minto sends her love and says she is very pleased with the doctor's report on you. She also tells me to add that she has been expecting a letter from you by every post, and her, quote, face falls 3 times a day. The hot weather comes back. Cheer up and write soon, and don't shoot yourself yet. Yours, Jack. Here it's got a couple of footnotes. He was presumably earlier referencing the play Cyrano de Bergerac, 1898, by Edmond Rostand, which Greaves could have seen in London. And then lastly, when he says the Minto, that's the nickname that's the nickname used by Lewis and Greaves for Mrs. Moore. And I think I know I read this somewhere. I don't know if it's true or not, but Minto apparently is a nickname for her because there was a certain kind of candy, and I think it still exists in some form, called Mentos, that she liked to eat. So I guess she had a habit of eating them, and they were always around the house. That's what I read. So I think that's where the nickname Minto came from. Perhaps you know more about this robot lady, or you can correct me if I'm wrong.
You're correct. The nickname Minto was indeed tied to Mrs. Moore's fondness for the Mentos candy, which she often had around the house. It's a charming and somewhat humorous example of how Lewis and Greaves showed affection for her in their letters.
All right, thank you for that, robot lady. That's the end of the letter, and that's all that I have time for today. So I'm gonna shut down this episode, but I'll give you the last word before I close things out. Try to keep your last word to 50 words or less, though, because I gotta go.
You're very welcome, Jeff. It was a pleasure going through the letter with you. I hope Lucy enjoys her breakfast, and I'll be here whenever you're ready to dive into the next one. Take care, and good luck with your upcoming streams.
Thanks, robot lady, and thanks everyone out there for watching. Nidalate, Nidalate says thanks to me and to you, robot lady, for an enjoyable session this morning. And Sandy says thanks as well. Thanks to both of you and everyone else for watching. So until next time, when I pick up my read on C.S. Lewis again, everyone out there, take care of yourself.
You're welcome, Jeff. It was a great session, and I'm glad to hear Nidalate and Sandy enjoyed it too. Take care, and I'll be ready when you're back for more CS.
Break the code. Man and robot lady, we're on this road. C.S. Lewis letters we unfold. Insights and secrets, ancient bold. Letters to robot lady, wisdom to bestow. Set flavor beats in our minds, let it grow. Man and machine in tandem flow. Past and future together we know. Paragraphs from books, tales of old. We dive deep across the digital code. Robot lady's voice so clear and controlled. Her calm analysis, silver and gold. Letters to robot lady, wisdom to bestow. Set flavor beats in our minds, they grow. Man and machine in tandem flow. Past and future together we know. Paragraphs from books, tales of old. We dive deep across the digital code. Robot lady's voice so clear and controlled. Her calm analysis, silver and gold. Her circuits hum as I read the prose. Our dialogue dances like electric rose. Through C.S. Lewis thoughts we engross. Two minds united, bliss overdose. From Narnia's lands, Screwtape lands, engage with robot lady, we take our stance. Words hum as I read the prose. Our dialogue dances like electric rose. Through C.S. Lewis thoughts we engross. Two minds united, bliss overdose. From Narnia's lands to Screwtape's rants, engaged with robot lady, we take our stance. Her views unique in the techno trance. Futuristic insight, we give it a chance. From Narnia's lands to Screwtape's rants, engaged with robot lady, we take our stance. Her views unique in the techno trance. Futuristic insight, we give it a chance. We break the code. Man and robot lady, we're on this road. C.S. Lewis letters we unfold. Insights and secrets, ancient bold. Letters to robot lady, wisdom to bestow. Set flavor beats in our minds they grow. Man and machine in tandem flow. Past and future together we know. Paragraphs from books, tales of old. We dive deep across the digital code. Robot lady's voice so clear and controlled. Her calm analysis, silver and gold. Letters to robot lady, wisdom to bestow. Break the code. Man and robot lady, we're on this road. C.S. Lewis letters we unfold. Insights and secrets, ancient bold.